Okay, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here with my friends, Brazilian friends, and my references. It's my first time presenting in English, so I want to apologize if I say something wrong, okay? So I'm going to share my screen. It's okay?
Yep, all good, thank you.
And that's better. So a little bit of background, I'm a bisexual activist since 2012 and a researcher on bisexuality. In 2018, I began to research at the university, mainly in the subject of media representation of bisexuality and its relationship with the struggle for recognition. I also have a master's degree in social communication and a degree in social communication, cinema, and audiovisual. I'm currently a member of the research group, Media and Narrative. I also compose the Brazilian Bisexual Front, and I also articulate a bisexual teamed film club with a Brazilian bisexual collective. So My Mom is a Character too. It's a movie, it's a Brazilian movie. It's a comedy film written and starred by Paulo Gustavo. He's very famous here, and it's based on his play of the same name. It is a sequel to the 2013 film My Mom is a Character, and was produced by Downtown Films and Global Films in association with Paramount and Universal Pictures. There's a sequel, My Mom is a Character 3, which was released on 2019. So Dona Hermínia is the main character. She's a rich and successful talk show host in this movie. However, this overprotective mother will have to deal with emptiness syndrome as Juliano, her son, and Marcelina, her daughter, decide to move to São Paulo, from Rio to São Paulo, to live their adult lives. So Hermínia struggles to accept the fact that her children are moving away. The movie reached the 3rd position on the ranking of most watched films in the history of Brazilian cinema, and it also became the highest grossing film in the history of Brazilian cinema. So my research, this research is from my master's degree, and it analyzes the cultural meanings of bisexuality in media representations, and it builds a critical relationship with the struggle for recognition. I approach representation as propositional and circulator of meanings that help in the formation of concepts about this group, and consequently in the treatment they receive in everyday life. So these cultural meanings of bisexuality, often shaped by stereotypes, can contribute to marginalization and erasure of this group. I studied the film My Mom is a Character too, through the 8 scenes. There are 8 scenes that mention the bisexuality of the character Juliano and the movie's critical fortune. Sorry. I perceive in My Mother as a Character too, the absence of relationships with the struggle for recognition of bisexuality, and the use of stereotypes and the bisexual erasure as one of the film's main comic devices. So I also recognize the presence of demands for more adequate representations in the struggle for recognition of bisexuality, but I endorse the criticisms that point to the limits of the struggle for recognition as a whole. So reinforcing, in the case of bisexuality, the proposal of an attentive struggle with a radical horizon in this politics. So I'm going to talk about 3 main concepts. The first one is representation, and the idea was to reflect on the concept of representation to understand how the meanings around bisexuality circulate. So I studied theories of representation and representation of difference with Roger Silverstone and Stuart Hall. And I studied also stereotypes with Walter Lippmann, Richard Dyer, and Eisner. Bisexuality is another main concept. The intention was to contextualize the meanings surrounding bisexuality historically and from the perspective of the social movement. So I wrote about binary narratives, gender, and sexuality as binary narratives with Judith Butler, Jaqueline Gomes de Jesus, and Viviane Vergueiro. Those are Brazilian authors. So More Than One Gender, also More Than Gender, and that's about bisexuality itself with Eisner and Keiji Yoshino. The third concept that is important to me here is recognition. The idea was to reflect on the struggle for recognition in the formation of its theory and its later criticism. So I made a theoretical path of recognition and categories of recognition with Axel Honneth. And I also found the debate about recognition, redistribution, and anti-predication with Safatli, who's Brazilian, and Nancy Fraser, with a Marxist criticism. So my analysis, I found out some stereotypes in the plot. I'm going to talk about 3 of them. The first one is temporary confusion. So those are quotes, are phrases of the characters, and I also collected quotes from blogs and newspapers. So my son insisted that he's bisexual, and my daughter invented that she's an actress. So it's an invention, like it's a choice like being an actress. He made up his mind and he wants to be straight now, but if he knows you, he'll go back immediately. The author recommends intervention by the father in his sexuality. Herminia, the main character, tries to include the problems of her children in her TV show. So in Giuliano's case, the fact that he came out as gay, but now he has doubts about his sexuality and consider being bisexual. So it's a problem in the movie. The second stereotype I identified there is sexuality as a choice. Herminia tells her son to don't come up with this straight thing. She says, I'll hit you in the face. And that's funny in the movie. It's trying to be funny. Giuliano's father says it's an exaggeration of hers and asks her to let him try it out. Because what if he likes it, being straight? Herminia replies that this has no future. And in the middle of this conversation, Giuliano says nothing and none shows discomfort. Don Herminia remains hilarious. You are very concerned about the family problems. Marcelina decides to be an actress and Giuliano bisexual. It's a decision. To make her problems even worse, Marcelina decides to be an actress and Giuliano assumes that he's bisexual. I also identify some categories of bisexual erasure in the representation. So those are the authors. And I found out there's the public and cultural sphere erasure, also in the social and community sphere, categorical erasure, individual erasure, and the legitimation. So I can say in the universe of the movie, there's no possibility of bisexuality existing. And also when Giuliano says he's bisexual, his family say that's not true. So it's an erasure of what he's saying. That's my final topic here. I made a debate, a debate about the struggle for recognition of bisexuality, and I found out that this debate is absent on and off screen. So as an example of this absence, some newspapers and blogs that did not make a connection between the representation of bisexuality and bisexuality itself in our society. And also the specific case of the third film in which Giuliano marries a man. The whole issue of bisexuality in the previous film is unresolved and it's not mentioned. And in this marriage, there's no kissing scene between them. So that's a thing that became a thing here in Brazil. The author, Paulo Gustavo, had to defend himself because this issue reached public debate and became controversial. So all 8 scenes of bisexuality in the previous film did not reach the public debate. Final considerations, I'm going to read it all. It is possible to propose representations of bisexuality who do not fear the use of stereotypes and manage to build more complex representations. Even so, it seems to be easier to make a simple and uncritical use of stereotypes or to choose its simple denial. I interpret the stereotypes in representations as information that escapes, that tell what issues are hidden in attempts to restrict certain groups socially and politically, so they can be appropriated and used in another way. We must ask ourselves, which traditions do the stereotypes of bisexuality want to keep standing? Patriarchal, capitalist traditions of specific bodies? Are we going to attack them directly? So I believe in a struggle for recognition combined with a struggle for redistribution without absolutely focusing on an affirmation of an individual identity of bisexual people, but rather with the pursuit of this affirmation in addressing and constantly opposing ourselves against the capitalist system, the gender and sexuality structures, patriarchy, sexism, heteronormative, binarism, and in alignment with other anti-oppression movements. So the demand for representations considered more adequate does not need to have a single dimension and does not need to be a single objective when thinking about communication bisexuality. So just to finish it, representation, which is stereotyping social meanings, can be the starting point of a reflection that through communication makes us understand the position of bisexuality in society, allowing us to understand this society quickly and trying strategies for its transformation. So some references here, and big thank you to you all.
So my name is Talitta Cancio. And I'm so glad to be here and with other Brazilian researchers, Nanda and Bia, and I have just graduated in social communication, and my research is about bisexual representation in Brazilian soap operas. So I'm a member of Brazilian Bisexual Front, like Nanda, and I'm member, and sorry, I'm so nervous. And I also write about bisexual representation in the media on my Instagram page, Vina Media. And I already apologized for my English. For sure, we'll have some mistakes. So if it's hard to understand what I'm saying, please let me know and I will try to rephrase. Okay. The aim of my work is to analyze the representations of bisexual characters in soap operas from the perspectives of gender and sexuality, cultural studies, bisexual epistemologies, and television studies. An important point for me is to focus on intersectional and decolonial studies to understand the place of bisexuality and its representation within the coloniality of power. It is not possible for us to mechanically apply the theories produced in the North in our context in the South. It is urgent for research on gender and sexuality to go beyond the authors of the global North, who reflect historical, social, and economic realities that are completely different from our own. It is necessary to build other conceptual and theoretical tools to think about the different realities of the Latin America context. In Latin America, sexualities, desires, and erotic regimes are marked by colonial relations and multiple forms of exploitation and subalternization, the racialization of sexuality, and the sexualization of racial relations. Perspectives such as from the queer of color critique research fields are fundamental. These studies deal with issues of gender and sexuality as inseparable from the post-neocolonial story of the West, considering the experience of slavery, racism, the diaspora, and the phenomenon of migration and new imperialisms. It is a field committed to discuss contemporary political problems in an intersectional and decolonized way, a version that rejects the Euro-American centric narrative of progress and modernity in terms of sexual and gender issues. There is no way to address issues of sexuality in Brazilian soap operas disregarding the country's historical, economic, political, and social context. In my research, based on cultural studies on representations with authors such Stuart Hall, like Nanda too, I chose to study bisexual representation in the main Brazilian audiovisual product, the soap operas. I don't know if everyone here is aware of the dimension of soap operas in Brazil. Every day, 40 million people are reached by soap operas. The main soap opera that plays 9 p.m. is at the peak of TV ratings. And this sector moves the largest number of advertising investments in the country. In addition, Brazilian soap operas are exported to over 100 countries. Internet still doesn't reach the entire Brazilian territory, but TV does. Therefore, it is very important to understand how certain groups are represented in this space, because they are an important part of the formation of the country's social imaginary. In my research, I mapped all the bisexual characters in soap operas on TV Globo, TV Globo, the largest broadcaster and enterprise in the country and the second in the world, the main producer of soap operas. And to get to the bisexual characters, I crossed some data between surveys that already exist with a service on LGBT characters and the files made available by the broadcaster, Globo, né? I considered as bisexual the characters who had bisexual practice, that is, affective and or sexual relationships with more than one gender throughout their plot in a consensual way and who enjoyed the act. I analyze how the characters bisexuality has constructed and presented. In my mappage, I found 47 characters were identified in 38 soap operas, shown from 1979 to 2021. Of these, 30 are characters considered men and 17 women. In these 42 years of representation in soap operas, only 3 times the word bisexual or bi was said. All of them only after 2013. And none of these times the bisexual character themselves was the person to say the word. Due to all the monosexium structure and the bisexual erasure in society, none of these characters was read as bisexual. The audience's reading was that these characters were former gays or former heterosexuals, even though some of them were immediately represented as relating or desiring more than one gender at the same time, either through cheating or being in non-monogamous relationships. It is possible to find a number of articles from newspapers and news portals talking about bisexual characters as characters who went back to the closet. In the case of characters who started the plot in a same-sex relationship and then moved into a relationship considered heterosexual. That is, even in representations full of bisexual stereotypes, in most of soap operas, the characters are neither presented nor read as bisexual. I'm not going to enter the issue of stereotypes here, but I'm full agreement with Shiri, Eisner, and Jacob's notes on this. It is not the center, and we also have to be careful not to create the image of good bisexual and bad one. What we need to delve into and think about is how can bisexuality be intelligible in the audiovisual media? How can bisexuality be represented? Stereotypes are, without doubt, the easiest way to do this, but as in the case of the audience of Brazilian soap operas, not even the stereotypes are capable to making bisexuality be considered a possibility. The situation are read using the monosex logic, and people will not think the characters are bisexuals. So I believe we should go to the quotes. In scripts, bisexuality needs to be stated explicitly and in all the letters. The word bisexual has to be said. The delay to monosexism is so significant that for a bisexual representation to be successful, we need something as a silly and basic as the word itself. At the moment, this is the best way for me for bisexuality to be seen and understood as existing. Oh. So Jacob, including in your article against good bisexual representation towards bisexual cinematic pleasure, it's amazing, I have to say. You question whether the demand for more representation is the right one to make. And I tell you that for me, yes, especially in the context of subaltern countries like Brazil, which have almost no, we don't see us in the most famous movies and series. It makes a lot of difference to be represented. And like bisexuals too. The erasure is gigantic for us. I do believe that we should continue studying and debating how bisexuality can be represented cinematically and all its impact. But right now, consider the social and economic context here, we need the basics of hearing the word bisexual being said. For many people to know that our sexuality exists and that is a possibility. So that is it in a short way. I'm so much intelligent in Portuguese. It's so hard to say my research in English. Is the first time I present in other language. So I hope you can understand what I say. And that's my contacts on Instagram, Twitter, and email. And that's it.
I would like starting to acknowledge that I'm really honored to be here today in this bisexual conference, because as a teenager, I would never think that it would be something so big as a global conference just to speak about bisexual research. So I'm really honored to being part of this. So thank you for all the organizers. I know that it's pretty rough to do such a big event. And I would also want to apologize in advance because I'm sick today, so I might cough a lot, but I hope not. I hope everything goes smoothly, but I would just want to apologize beforehand. So presenting myself a little bit, I'm Beatriz Hermans. I'm a 5th-year psychology student. Here the bachelors are 5 years. I research gender and sexuality for the last 3 years, and my last research is about the patriarchal roots of biphobia. That means how biphobia, the prejudice against bisexual people, affects different genders and how that's related to sexism. I started doing this research because I saw a lot of papers speaking about gender problems with bisexuality and biphobia and so on, but I couldn't find any research that spoke specifically about how biphobia affected different experiences with genders. The only one that I saw that spoke a little bit more and really had a profound meaning to me was Bi Notes for a Bisexual Revolution, which I think every single one has cited here because Shiri Eisner really had a revolutionary book here for us. So she speaks in 2 chapters about bisexuality and women, bisexuality and men. So that helped me a lot. But even though I couldn't find anywhere that they spoke specifically about gender and biphobia. So I started wanting to research specifically here from Brazil, but sadly I didn't find a lot of articles about bisexuality here. So I started looking into North America, and I used more than anything else the Bisexual Journal of Bisexuality. And I started by looking at every single piece of article that I could find about bisexuality in the last 5 years. After that, I filtered them and I started to look which ones would speak about biphobia. So I didn't want to speak about bisexuality and representation, bisexuality and relationships. I wanted to speak about biphobia. So that was the first filter. And the second filter that I used was to look at what are the biphobias and genders. So I looked at research that spoke biphobia in women, biphobia in men, biphobia in non-binary people, and that's a topic here because I didn't find any. I found 3 articles in general speaking about non-binary people and bisexuality, but none of them really related the gender to the biphobia, so I couldn't use any. So sadly, in my results, I only speak about, my analysis is only about women and men and biphobia. It came to the result that we need to research a lot more about non-binary people and bisexuality, but I already saw that a lot of researchers talked about it today, so it made me really happy that it seems that it's coming along a little bit more. But I want to make this disclaimer, it's not that I don't know that non-binary people don't exist, sorry. It is that I didn't find any articles about it. So after these 2 filters, I reached the number of 127 articles that I analyzed, both here from Brazil and from North America. From Brazil, sadly, there were less than 20 articles. So most of them is an analysis about North American views and peer-reviewed articles, even though the Bisexual Journal is pretty much international because there are Dutch papers there are Spanish papers there, Portuguese as well. So a lot of bisexual people publish there from all around the globe. So now we are already 5 minutes in. I have to speak a little bit of the research itself and the results. So I used the Barden methodology from 2012 to speak about, to make the analysis. And for that, we categorize the main tropes that appear in the general spectrum of the articles. So I read all of 127 and I see, okay, when I put the filter gender and woman and biphobia, what are the main tropes? The main tropes that I found was hypersexualization, erasure, confusion, and invisibility. Okay, so I will count each time that this appears in all of the articles, and with this set number, I can speak about it. And the same thing with bisexual men. First of all, bisexual women, there were 141 words, mentions about hypersexualization, 77 for erasure, 117 for confusion, and 26 for invisibility. And that really had an impact in me, because when I compare that to biphobia in men, also bisexuality, biphobia, and men, this filter, the hypersexualization, which was the main concern by bisexuality in women, did not appear at all. So it had no single mention. But there were a mention by bisexuality in men that didn't appear in bisexual women, which was homosexual, which seems a little bit strange or not, but it showed that even though you say that a bisexual man is bisexual, they will be perceived as homosexual, which we know in experience, but it was quite had an impact to see it in all those articles. So it appeared 67 times that a bisexual man was actually homosexual, 55 times that they were erased, 60 times that they were confused, and none time that they were hyposexual. So that really made quite a thing. So I think that one thing that we can speak of is that gender is a problem. We have gender problems. So each gender has its own problems. And when we speak about homosexuality, we are speaking mainly about gay men. And so we already have the filter men and queer. They are gay men. And when we speak about lesbophobia as well, we already have the filter, is a queer woman, a lesbian woman. Okay, so we can speak about this prejudice specific about their sexual identity being as well as filtered by their gender. When we speak about bisexuality, we don't have that, because any gender could be bisexual. So how can we explain and see biphobia? It's really complex, and I really want to expand this research for a qualitative study in my master's or my PhD and so. But for now, what I can say for the results is that the sexism really has a lot of impact in those, because when we speak about bisexual women, we see them as with a male gaze. So men will look at bisexual woman with a male gaze, and women will see the bisexual woman per the male gaze, even though they are women. They will look at this bisexual person and they will perceive that this woman actually wants men. And that is the same thing with bisexual men. Bisexual men will never be perceived as wanting to be in a relationship with a woman. They will always be perceived as being gay, even though they say and they explain and they reach out and speak that they are bisexual. So the conclusion that I can get in this really, really summed up presentation is that the sexism has a really impactful way in this biphobia, because bisexuals don't have a gender. They are from all genders. And everyone always thinks that bisexual actually want to be with men. So why would we want to be with a woman or a non-binary person if you can be with a man? So that's sums it up. Thank you very much for the space and the time and the attention.